So this is really where I've been living lately. Surrounded by picture books about death. I know how to have a good time. Anyway, there are 78 books in this larger collection, all of which were published between 2015 and 2025. And I've just narrowed that list down to 20 for my pilot study. Now, these stories are about endings, pets, grandparents, trees, stars, but they're also stories about what comes after. The work I'm trying to figure out is how contemporary children's books teach kids to live with the fact that life ends. And that's the question at the center of absolutely everything. I'm Nick. I'm an associate professor of elementary literacy education K-6 here at UNL. And here's a brief insight into my current research. A few years ago, I guest edited an issue of First Opinions, Second Reactions on death in picture books. Each book received two reviews, one from a children's literature scholar and one from a classroom teacher who'd shared it with students. And the teacher reflections were the spark because kids jumped right into these conversations. But adults got nervous. Some worried the topic was too dark, and that disconnect right there stuck with me, not as a moral question necessarily, but as a literacy question. What language do we give children for death? And how do those texts shape what count as an acceptable way to grieve or to make meaning for that matter? So, my colleagues and I followed up. We interviewed those teachers and published that study in Language Arts, which brings us here. Now, this project extends that earlier work as a critical content analysis that uses terror management theory to understand the stories we're giving children about mortality. Terror management theory, or TMT, starts with a psychological claim. Humans know we're going to die. And that knowledge right there creates anxiety. I mean, how could it not? To live with it, we build cultural worldviews, beliefs, rituals, art, stories that promise continuity or significance beyond death. So the question that I'm asking is, how do picture books participate in that process? What cultural scripts are they giving kids for managing the fear of mortality? That means my data becomes the words, the images, the metaphors, and the patterns across all of these picture books, how they talk about death and how they don't talk about it. Also, what they suggest makes life meaningful. Now, the 20 books I've chosen for this pilot cover a wide range of approaches. There's nature cycle books, where death is part of seasonal change. Personified death books, where death shows up as an actual character in the story. There are memory or legacy stories about living on through others, as well as religious or spiritual promise books, where the afterlife is comfort, as well as abstract or poetic texts that gesture toward mystery. I also included several translated as well as non-US titles because ideas about death are deeply cultural. And I want to look across those books to see what kinds of defense strategies against mortality anxiety they model. Is it continuity? Is it comfort? Is it containment? And I'm doing this pilot to test whether that theoretical frame, TMT, actually helps me see something new, or if children's literature demands some different model altogether. Because honestly, I've been working on this project for probably around 5 years and just have not experienced the theory that wants to claim my work. Now the unglamorous part, the spreadsheet. And this is where the work starts to become visible to me. Every row is a book. Every column captures details that might become evidence later. Title, author, illustrator, year, the kind of death in the book. The language, is it direct? Is it euphemistic? Is it silent? And who does the emotional labor? How does the story resolve? Is it in comfort, in continuity, avoidance, legacy? And when I'm filling this spreadsheet in, I'm not just cataloging, I'm building a data set of representational patterns. This is how I start to answer my research question. When I notice, for example, that books written after 2020 lean heavily towards emotional literacy language, breathe, feel, remember, while earlier ones lean toward cosmic reassurance, you'll see them again. That's evidence of a cultural shift in how we script death for children. The spreadsheet lets me see that. It's not busy work. It's the first layer of analysis in disguise. Now, once the sheet is stable and I have enough information to get working, I move into Transana. Transana is software built for qualitative analysis, but it's perfect for picture books because I can upload PDFs and code both language as well as image. In a picture book, meaning lives between these two modalities. The text might say, "It's okay," but the illustration might say, "But it's not." So in Transana, I can tag a line like, "Grandpa is part of the stars now," as verbal continuity, and tag the image of a small child under a vast sky as visual continuity. Then I can track where these motifs repeat across the dataset. This is where I start producing coded evidence, clusters of examples that show how certain strategies for managing death anxiety recur in contemporary children's literature. Now, this right here, this is where theory begins to meet the page. Because if I start seeing new hybrid strategies, say comfort through emotional regulation, that would be nice. I haven't found that yet, actually, but here's hoping. Then I know I'm extending the theory, not just applying it. I'm in early days of my Transana analysis, despite the fact that this conference is coming up, and early patterns are already emerging. In books published after 2020, they often treat death as an emotional literacy exercise. Name your feelings, find calm, practice resilience, whereas earlier books were likely to lean on belief or nature cycles for stability. And what's interesting is what that shift says about our culture, particularly in pandemic and post-pandemic years, where we've moved from external sources of meaning, like religion or nature, to internal ones, like emotion or mindfulness. And that's the kind of knowledge that a project like this produces. I'm not creating a list of good or bad books, but I'm creating an account of what these stories tell us about how societies teach children to live with loss. So yes, there's theory, there's spreadsheets and coding software, but the work underneath all of it is how that meaning circulates through stories. Because children's literature doesn't just entertain, it quietly teaches kids what's normal to hope for and what's acceptable to fear, as well as how to understand themselves in relation to life and death. By mapping those patterns, I'm trying to help teachers, parents, and scholars see that these books are not neutral. They're cultural scripts for existential education. And that, in my head, that's the real work. So that's where I am. 20 books, coded and cataloged, theory in one hand, a spreadsheet in the other, and somewhere between noticing and knowing, building the structures that will let the insights show themselves. And this stage of research isn't glamorous, but it's really the heartbeat. Every little piece, the Excel rows, the coded pages, the small patterns that start to repeat, is part of learning how stories help us live with the hardest truth there is, that life ends and meaning has to come from what we build while we're here. That's the work, and that's what it looks like. So thanks for taking a quick little dive into my current project. I'm gonna get back to some coding because, conference coming soon. But thanks for stopping by.